Okay, so let's continue our cross project day. So I spoke, we got two Nova topics on here. I talked real quickly with Gibby, and there didn't seem really to be a need to have Nova people here. So we can discuss these. I guess I need to update the PTG thing. Okay, so this first topic, let me scroll. Um, So Lee Arwood had proposed this, but he can't be here. And at this point, he should be a new father. I haven't heard anything, though. He's taking a small paternity break. Um, so, but there's a link to this discussion on the mailing list. Um, and I'm drawing a blank on what this is all about. Um, I think he
Yeah, connection info refresh is what you're talking about.
um, actually, let me put the. All right, so he's interested in doing this. So I think the background is just basic. It's partly um, right. Nova would like to be using the V3 attachment flow instead of the V2, and I think currently they use both depending on the age of the information in the Nova database. So I think the proposals that the Cinder volume drivers would add a new flag to connection info so that we would know if you try to reinitialize the connection, whether it's going to be an idempotent call or not.
Yeah, there was a couple of issues that led to them needing this concept of a way to refresh connection info. Because I think the main request here is about um, a new Cinder API to get new connection info, right? Or to refresh existing connection info.
Okay, right, there you go. So the at line 473. All right, I was missing that about the new. So it's in addition to the flag for drivers, we would have this.
Yeah, so just to frame at least the motivations that I'm aware of for this, um, there was one issue that comes up with Ceph, um, but I don't actually remember what it is. I don't know if it's something to do with if you change your networking or what exactly, but there's some case for Ceph where this would be a useful thing to fix a problematic scenario. And there's also a need for this with the NFS driver, because when you create and delete snapshots on the NFS driver, the path that you're supposed to open as the instance consuming the volume changes when you create or delete snapshots a lot of the time. And there's some scenario that I don't recall exactly. There's a Nova bug written about this somewhere. But there's some scenario where through a sequence of the instance going up and down, or maybe through a shelve operation and Cinder snapshot operations, the connection info that Cinder would give as far as how to properly attach the NFS volume changes, and Nova still has a cached idea of what it used to be, and it can actually open the wrong file on NFS for that volume, which is a giant data corruption kind of problem. So as far as I know, this proposal kind of came out of existing limitations that have caused problems with certain scenarios that have come up.
Sorry. I guess what we want to do here today is just an initial response, whether this seems reasonable or not. I think what I'd like to do is, since we're meeting virtually anyway, when Lee gets back, maybe we can have a meeting to just go over in a little more detail exactly what he's proposing. But it seems reasonable to me. And he's going to have to, I don't think he had time to, he was going to draft a spec. I don't think he had time to do that before he left. All right, we're going to need a spec because the API changes. So, I guess, so I just want initial reaction from people hearing this.
It seems reasonable enough to me from what I've looked at so far.
Yeah, I mean, that's my gut reaction too. I mean, so I'll talk to Lee when he gets back, and then see if he just wants to write up the spec and we can comment on the spec, or if it would be useful to do a virtual meeting so we can just talk this out a bit. Okay. So that's, unless anybody has something they'd like to add. Or, as always with the magic of the Etherpad, if you have second thoughts later today or over the weekend or something for red flags, go ahead and add them. We can take that into account. But this seems like a reasonable proposal. Yes. All right, any comments, observations, etc.?
It's somewhere around there in the Etherpad, somewhere the original message thread. No, there was a thread where I went on about the preview, the implementation patch that had some issues. Or
yeah, I think. Yeah, I think at that link at line 455, that email I think contains your response.
No,
that okay, so it's a different
well,
one.
Yeah, it contains, but it contains the short version. Just a clarification, but there was some kind of analysis where I went on and on, you know me.
Okay.
But apparently it was a different mail thread than that one, because I cannot follow that thread.
Okay.
And in that one, I think I did at least a little bit of analysis on some of the issues that, and probably reading that would help us understand why Lee went with this whole adding 2 different APIs and Cinder, etc.
All right. Yeah, Lee should have a reference to that if we can't find it ourselves. So, okay. We'll make sure we include that. So Fernando's got a comment in the chat. Driver operations leave broken volume connections in VMs. Maybe it could be useful for Nova to automatically reestablish iSCSI connections after failover failback.
Yep, this is one of the problems I encounter when I help John Bernard work on the RBD replication. Replication to do the DR. And yeah, it's a whole. I don't know if this one would help or if we need something else, but it's really a pain in the ass trying to do because you have your VM attached to an instance. Your volume attached to an instance, then you fail over. Now your connection info is useless. So ideally, we should be able to tell them, hey, we either give them a new connection info or we tell them, please refresh these volumes because you don't have access to the data. But we don't have anything like that. So what you end up is that your instances cannot actually access the volume anymore, even if the volumes are now accessible if you try to reconnect. What I did last time, this is a couple of years ago, is to just reattach it again. But that's useless. If it's a boot volume, it's useless. If it's not a boot volume, still, you have the volume attached, but probably you're not using it because you're referring to the old one internally. Basically, it's that the DR is kind of broken because you have to do a lot of manual stuff to recover from that, since your VMs cannot access the data now. The thing is that I'm not sure up to which point this is doable, let's say. If you're doing multipath and multipath is enabled, you can probably work around this by doing the OS brick attach of the new paths, because you would have a device mapper with, let's say, 2 paths, and you may have buffer data that cannot go to those disks. If you have synchronous replication in the backend, you know that your replica has all the data. So when you fail over, the data is fine. And you could potentially flush your buffer data from your host, your compute host. So if you just attach initialize the connection of the volume again and attach it, those new paths to the replica could appear under the same device map. And now you will have 4. 2 to the old one that are fail state to the new one, and then multipath B could flash the data into that one and keep working, and then you could detach the old one. But that's really complicated. So even if it's broken, I'm not sure that we have a way to fix it, because we have synchronous replication, asynchronous replication, and if you flash data from your node when you don't know what is written on the disk, it's not really great. So after a DR,
but Gorka, it's not synchronous replication, is it? If it's not, the whole point of synchronous replication is once you've flushed it, it is on both sides of the synchronous replica. That's the definition of synchronous. So you know that when you do those additional multipath connections, they're fine and everything's okay.
No, what I mean is, if you are doing a failover, not multipath failover, but failover in the Cinder replication, so you only have, that is fine. What I mean is that, I mixed two things. First, the fact that if you have synchronous replication, we could modify OSBrick, Cinder, and Nova so that everything could work, but it's not easy, let's say, because right now, it's not easy, because the OSBrick, the way you would flash the old paths, it's not ready. The code is not ready to leave a couple of paths and remove a couple of them from the old source, let's say. So that is something that we could do, but then we have to improve the replication also to be able to discern between synchronous and asynchronous. RBD is asynchronous, so we wouldn't want it to work. So if you have asynchronous, we can improve this for iSCSI. It's going to be a bit of work to make it happen. And it mostly would work for multipath, not if you don't have multipath. So yeah, basically, I don't know if anybody wants to work on this. I can discuss it with them, but this is not 10 lines patch. So it is a very big gap that we have currently. And like Simon was saying, if you have synchronous, you're losing a lot of the benefit of having synchronous replication, basically, with the current code that we have. Because on that kind of backend, you could just continue working. No data loss, nothing. But right now, I don't think you can do that. So I don't know if Fernando wanted to have a look into that, or if he was just bringing up this problem that we have with Nova. Oh, you want to work on it? If you want, you can ping me and we can discuss it, and probably we will, after talking about it, we can bring Lee Garwood into it when he comes back, because he's worked a lot into the Cinder Nova interactions. Okay, cool. We'll try to write a couple of comments here about the item works we would have to have. Okay. Sorry for making it so confused.
All right, good. This is yeah, this would address a pain point, but it does sound quite complicated.
You have to remember also that there are two types of synchronous replication. There's active-active and active-passive. So with active-active, you've already got the multipath connections to the second array. So the volume is connecting via multipath to both arrays at the same time. So you've got double the number of multipath connections. Whereas with active-passive, that's where you're going to have to reconnect to the remote array. So that's something to be aware of.
Thank you. I'll add it here, yeah.
Not every vendor supports both types. They'll support one or the other usually.
Yeah, I just realized I should narrate for people watching this recording later. We were being quiet and leaving Gorka time to type out his thoughts, um, which you can see on the Etherpad now.
Yeah, I think that's mostly everything.
Okay, good, thanks. So we have something to come back to. Any other thoughts about this that people want to get in? Okay, as always, Etherpad's there, so you can go back, add questions or comments or whatever. good. Okay. All right, the next topic is dynamic QoS. So this is me and Eric again. This is kind of a weird topic because, so we'll lay out roughly this could be done, but I think we're still looking for somebody who'd be interested in doing it at this point. So situation is we can get the front end QoS when a VM starts up, but there's no way to modify it while the VM's still connected. And some people would like to do that. So roughly, we can use the Nova. Nova has this external events API. So I've got a link there at line 504 if you want to take a look at that. And so it's specifically to give services a way to communicate with Nova that Nova needs to take some kind of action for whatever the event is. So I talked with Gibby real quick. They're not against this idea at all, but there's nobody on the Nova side who's like just itching to implement this. So we'd have to have a Nova spec to change the API to get the information that we need over there. And then we'd have to add the code to Nova that would basically get the information out of the API request and then gets it down to libvirt where it can actually affect the QoS.
I assume you're talking just here about front end.
Right, I'm sorry. Yeah, so front end QoS, right. So I should probably say that. So anyway, it's I don't know what to say. Yeah, so it's interesting if you would like to get involved doing some Nova code, this would be an interesting entry point. And it's a fairly well-defined, task. So I just want to make people aware that it exists and see if anyone had any questions or comments or ideas.
It's a good idea.
Okay, thanks.
I think this is something that's been talked about in one way or another for a while. So
yeah, I contacted Gibby, the Nova PTL, before the PTG, just to see, and he thought this sounds reasonable. He doesn't see that there'd be any opposition to this on the Nova side, but they don't have anybody itching to do it either. So
yeah, I think there's with the IOPS per gigabyte case where they change the volume size, that's obviously a good use case. I think there are more, public cloud use cases too, where people may need to dynamically change QoS without wanting to reboot. So it would be a good ad for it.
okay. All right, that's all for that. Okay, so now we can move on to the Cinder business part of today. So, I'd like to take a quick look at some specs that have been proposed. There's a link at line 515. Okay, so we've got looks like Gorka's proposed one pretty recently. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to?
Well, if you're talking about the spec about the volume types,
Yeah.
that's one in the previous PTG, I said I would do, and I just did it yesterday or something like that. I finished it. It's basically the possibility to have multiple volume types, default volume types. That's the key word, default. Right now we have default for where that is defined on the API. So you have a single one for all the users, but depending on your deployment, you need more than that. You have different ACs and things like that. So what people are currently doing, at least the ones I know having this problem, are basically they create a default volume type with a wording that makes it clear that they have to forcefully define the volume type. So they set it to please use volume type. So that what happens is they make it so that it can never reach a backend with a crazy backend name or whatever. So when the user makes the call, create volume, and suddenly they see what's the status? It's in error, and you see the volume type. And you say, oh, I forgot. You have to set because I'm in Spain, it has to be in the data center in Spain. So I have to use my volume type. So the proposal was to introduce per user, per tenant in a global configurable default as well, so that you can change the default without having to go into the cinder.com file and restart everything. The proposal ended up being a little more complicated than I anticipated. And since I wasn't going to be the one implemented it, it's longer because I wanted to express as much as possible. But there is one alternative that it's a lot simpler, but only adds tenant, per tenant default volume types. Instead of having 3 different levels, the third level, which is global, basically came in for free when I was thinking of the other two. But there is, I mentioned in the doc, in the spec, that there is an alternative if we only do tenant, which is basically just modify one just adding a field into a table and then use that table instead. So, yeah. I know that some customers want this, but yeah.
Just roughly, how useful is the tenant only?
I would have to ask the customers to see if that is enough, because I think in many cases that's probably enough. Maybe they don't need the per user one, but originally, since I said that it was going to have tenant and user, that's what I wrote. But I don't know the rest of the people in the meeting if they have an idea of if they know any customer that may want this and whether they would need, like you say, if it's sufficient with the tenant one or if they need also per user. I will try to find out and add it to the review of the spec.
So I was going through the spec today. So last time also we introduced a default type that was a partial implementation. We had a default type when no default type was passed, and I think it makes sense to provide that functionality for users as well. I don't know any customers and that, but it would make sense to implement it fully instead of implementing it partially many times. And I know it's a little more work, but I think it makes sense.
Although, like, in terms of quotas and things, right? Most of the stuff we have is per tenant, I believe, right? We don't have much per user. I mean, so thinking of the user, right, as the tenant is all, right? Because, Gorky, you're talking about actual per individual user. So one tenant could have like 5 different users, each of who would have their own private volume type.
No, not private volume type, default.
No, I'm sorry, not
type.
right.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
sorry.
The thing is that one of the things that happen here, unlike quotas, the default user type is something that any user would be able to set for themselves. I'm a user. I set my own thing. I'm my own user. I can set it. I cannot send the default for the tenant, but just for myself. The default from the tenant is not good for me. I want to use a specific one. I want to use the cheap one because I want to spend less.
So it would be sort of like setting an environment variable for the Cinder client, except that you could do it in Cinder itself, so it never forgets, right? So,
yep, that could be it.
Okay, I see.
That's the only benefit of the user part. Yeah, that also users can do it.
Right.
So Gosa,
Okay.
correct me if I'm wrong, but it's optional, right? We don't need, it's not mandatory for any user or any tenant to have it. It's just an option to provide them the flexibility to use it, like to define it.
Yeah, it's correct. They are, I changed the name of the spec, if you read the title, to overrides in terms of, because you have the underscore default underscore, which is if there nothing else is defined, this is the one we use. If you have one in the Cinder conf, that takes precedence. If you define with this new API a global default, that takes precedence over what's in the file. If you define a tenant one, higher precedence, a user one, so it goes from specific to generic, the precedence. So each one can have their own. But it may be overkill. I don't know to have that many options.
I'm not sure about how useful will it be to set up default volume time per user, but we definitely it would be good to have this per tenant.
Okay, that's good.
I tend to agree that a per tenant basis is better than a per user basis.
Well, in this case, we would have both. It's just the question is whether per user has any real value enough to make it worth to do the coding for it. The per tenant is a sure thing. We would always have per tenant. That's the bare minimum, and but per user is like, I don't know if it's useful or not.
Yeah, I mean, I could see the per tenant one would be like would be useful to set a default for everybody who's in your project. And then if they want to do something else, they're allowed to. Otherwise, you know exactly where everything's going. Well, you don't, because there's really not much difference between them overriding it in the request as opposed to them having set the override permanently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is there a blueprint for this, or just the spec at the moment?
The blueprint, like Rajak told me, it's like a one-liner.
That's
So
okay.
yeah, there's a.
There's something there we can tag on to and keep an eye on it.
Oh yeah, there is a blueprint, and it should be in the reference in the spec. If
Yeah,
I
line
didn't make a
13 in the
mistake.
spec.
Chris?
Yeah, I guess the only, so I don't know, this is probably a dumb kind of reaction. My only reaction to the per user is maybe it sets a bad precedent of Cinder having to remember stuff for everybody. It's just, I don't know. I can just see it's kind of adding bloat to the Cinder database that maybe, I don't know. I mean, I can see how it's useful because instead of me having to remember to set my environment variable every time, I open a shell to do stuff with Cinder, Cinder's going to remember it for me. I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think it will also work. Yeah, because the problem in this case, what they used to happen is that suddenly they could do cross AC attachments, and suddenly their VMs were crazy slow, and the user was wondering what's going on, why this is so that slow. That was the primary case with the customer I talked. So it's to basically what you said, set an environmental variable and make sure that the users don't have this problem.
So I can see, so with the per tenant one, it's like you figure whoever's setting it for the tenant is responsible enough to know exactly to do the right thing. But then when you let the users, each individual user do it, you might get this cross AZ situation again because they're picking. Well, I guess the idea is, right, the administrator would define proper volume types, so that's not going to happen. The problem was the default one, putting you in the wrong place.
Sometimes I think we give too much credit, and so giving them the users the ability to set a default one is probably not a good idea.
Okay, I just talked with the TAM of the customer, and they told me that what they needed was per project tenant. So if we think that given the users this possibility is not worth the effort, because yeah, if the tenant is good enough, I don't mind rewriting the spec and making it simpler, because it would be a lot simpler.
Yeah,
I completely understand the use case from a per tenant perspective. It's very much an MSP type solution. I guess your customer's MSP. I completely see that. But the user one, I think we give too many control knobs sometimes to people, and then that just causes more issues and breaks more things and causes more problems for the administrators in the long run. So doing the user one to me doesn't make the best sort of sense. But I completely support the tenant level.
Okay, this has been useful. I will rewrite the spec and make it simpler to implement, and I will just we will not have the global one, we will just have the tenant one, which I think is good enough, because the global one is basically not having to restart the Cinder services. It's not the end of the world, so it should be fine.
I mean, I guess the global one is actually the __default__.
Correct. Yep, you could modify that one on the fly, but if it's in use, I don't think you can modify it. So that's the trick. If you have already created one volume with it, you cannot just go and set new extra specs.
Yeah.
Because that would affect the existing one. So yeah, we have a global one.
Yeah, that's down to the administrator of the whole cloud to be able to define the default one before anyone uses it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So yeah, we agree that it's not a big thing, that we cannot define the global, and that the user is probably not a great idea. So we'll change it. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Gorka. That was useful discussion. All right, so next one was remove quota usage cache. Lost here. Okay.
I think this spec is basically a lot of the idea that we were talking about with the quota work the other day of try to get rid of the quota usages table and live calculate values instead of manually double accounting them is pretty much the guts of what this is suggesting as far as I could tell.
Eric, some time ago I found your patch with quota-related patch with DLM in the API. Does it solve the same issue or not? I'll try to find the patch now.
So that patch that I wrote solved one very specific issue, which is not the commonly seen one, or it was aiming to solve it. The general race condition that shows up with this quota stuff is the accounting and the quota usages table of, and the actual values get out of sync of how much volumes or how many gigabytes you're using. The patch that I wrote that I think you're talking about fixed a very different case that's shown up for one or two customers where there's a race condition the very first time a user creates a volume or presumably some other resources. The quota usages table doesn't yet have a row that represents that user's or that project's use of volumes or gigabytes or whatever. And we've seen one or two customers, I guess, fire up a new cloud, throw a few requests at it that race against each other. And then the quota usages table actually has two entries for counting, say, how many volumes a project has. And then things break because Cinder only ever updates and uses one of them after that, because there's not supposed to be two rows for the same, the same thing you're tracking like that. So that was targeted at one specific case that was different from the normal case. But we hit the brakes on that one for now because that only works. The patch that I wrote only works if you have a DLM deployed for your Cinder API service, and normally you don't. So if you did that, it would help, but most people don't actually do that currently.
I like the alternative listed on the spec is fix all the bugs in quota usage.
Yeah, no, I mean, this spec, it basically says get rid of the quota usages table, which I do think is the right thing to do. And it's probably useful that we have something tracking the impact of doing that.
Well, I see Yvonne already left a comment about it would be good to have some kind of performance results. I agree. I mean, if Sam could do that, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, to do good performance testing on this kind of thing, we may want to at some point revisit an idea that I think we were working on a few years ago of building some kind of Zool job that can deploy the Cinder no-op volume driver so that you can just hammer the API with things to test. You could run Rally and test quota stuff, but not have a volume driver that slows everything down to where the perf stuff is not very interesting. This would be a good scenario where if we had some infrastructure for how to run, Rally tests with the no-op volume driver, it would be perfect for looking at questions like that.
Isn't it dependent on the performance of the VMs as well that you're running against?
Well, it just depends. I mean, the request here is basically prove that you don't create something that's too slow for actual users. So yeah, I mean, it's super hard to do meaningful perf measurements in the gate, but all we really need to do is prove that it doesn't grind to a halt whenever you go create 10,000 volumes or whatever.
Okay. That's good. All right. So it seems like I mean, when we had this discussion the other day, I mean, it was like the performance is the issue everybody's worried about. So I think if we can get some kind of results to show that it's not a major concern, I think that would go a long way to having everybody be in favor of doing this kind of thing.
So to do that, we basically probably just need to, I don't know, I guess we should just construct some Cinder deployment that has a bajillion volumes in it and start doing database tests against it by hand just to get a feel for what's going on there. I don't know how else we can really, there's this kind of pervasive worry that when you create a ton of volumes and then query the database, it's going to take a long time. So we can presumably make that happen and then show how long it takes to do it.
I mean, why is the cache not up to date? It seems like a simplistic question, but the cache should be more up to date than the database, shouldn't it? Because it should be faster because it's in memory.
It's not actually a cache. It's actually manually accounting usage every time you increase or decrease usage by creating and deleting things. And I don't think anybody actually knows exactly where the bugs are, but the general problem is that there are presumably a couple of race conditions somewhere that affect this, and also probably some obscure error paths where you can delete something and some strange thing fails and it never gets marked as being deleted from the usage. And I'm pretty sure that there's enough code around everything that touches this usage information that those two problems are a very plausible explanation to me that it's just not quite right. But nobody has ever figured out a good way to actually chase down exactly what is wrong in there. We do, I think, once a cycle have like one patch come in that fixes one little case of it, but we don't know if there's like 3 more or like 30 more or what that need to be fixed. So, yeah.
So is this really, so what the request should really be is completely remove the cache?
Well, yeah, that's what the spec
is. That what it's trying to say? Okay. Because that's going to affect a lot of code, though, isn't it, potentially?
So if we just remove this cache, it also could be raised in other place when we will fetch actual usage data and calculate it per request.
Yeah.
So this proposal probably won't fix all issues with race conditions.
But just pulling the cache out in itself may cause some more race conditions.
Yeah.
It's actually quite a big piece of work in testing.
Yeah, I think the race condition thing was what Eric had mentioned the other day, that in Nova they've decided to just have some slack and just figure sometimes you're going to go over.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a burst budget would be something that you could much more easily cater for. Give it an extra 10% or something.
Mm-hmm.
If you hit it, just say, oh, if you're less than 10% or 5% or something, which could be a configurable number, then just allow.
Okay. Well, it's good that there's interest in working on this. All right, and we've got Eric's reset state robustification. Looks like you've updated that, or somebody has.
I think I moved it into a newer directory the other day.
Okay.
Yeah, this is something that we need to do because we keep having customers shoot themselves in the foot with this command, which is not good for them and not good for those of us that have to keep digging them out of holes. The premise basically is you can run reset state and put things into states that are known to not be valid just by definition. Like if you reset a volume to available that was migrating and you leave the migration status as still progressing, or if you reset a volume to available and you don't clean up the attachments, that kind of thing. So the premise of this is basically to stop letting people run reset state with anything that they dream up and just doing it, and actually add some checks to at least detect things that we know are not valid things to actually do. The flip side, the only real objection I think to this concept that I think maybe Walt suggested, I don't know, somebody on the review, is that sometimes, as soon as we put restrictions in here to make it safer, there's probably going to be some weird case where somebody really needs to do the thing that we didn't think was a good idea, and then what? So there's kind of two ways to do this. I think one of the suggestions that came up in the spec review, which I honestly haven't looked at in a while, but I think one of the suggestions was to add a flag that's, no, I really do want to do this. Let me override the checks kind of thing. I think there maybe is a better alternative, which would be to just have the API version of this be nice and safe. And then for people who really need to do something that we would normally say is ill-advised, just give them a send or manage command instead of an API that will actually do that. Because I think for admins that are generally cleaning up this kind of stuff, that would probably be sufficient. And then the API can be left as more, let you reset things, but within what we think are reasonable bounds. So all that said, I think this is a pretty useful thing we should do. I wrote up a spec on it after I saw like the 5th customer case where somebody broke something with this thing. But I haven't actually been trying to work on it at all. So it's kind of been sitting around up for grabs if anybody is really interested in this area currently.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I don't know about the Cinder manage thing, something to think about. So you could still do it, just it would only be an admin. It would be yeah. Okay, so we should take a look at this real quickly. See, Eric's -2 to port backup. Modern compression.
The which one?
Support compression algorithms.
Yeah, so I think I -1 it, but as much as I usually like just doing things because they might be handy and cool, this basically proposed, hey, there's a couple of encryption or a couple of compression algorithms out there that could perform well. We should add them to Cinder backup. And my kind of first reaction was, I don't think we really need to be in the business of supporting like 12 different ways to compress backups. So if we want to add a modern compression algorithm that would be better than what we have, we should probably just pick one and do it instead of adding 2 of them, because you end up with all kind of dependencies and concerns that come in with maintaining this stuff forever. And I didn't really see a great argument for why we want to add 2 new ones when we could probably just pick whichever one we think would be better suited for us and just go with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of looking for some thought in that direction, which I guess the emitter actually replied to my -1 like the same day I gave it, and I haven't gone and looked at it again.
Yeah, so it looks like he went and checked and said ZSTD is better, but LZ4 is more available and supported. So he just wants to hear more opinions from Cinder members. So anyone interested in compression who wants to weigh in, I think one's available in PyPy, the other one's not, maybe. But this would be good to comment. So the proposer seems okay with the just picking a good one and going with it. So he just wants some guidance on what we think is a good choice. So anyone interested in compression who's got an opinion, please leave it on that spec.
I also probably should consider whether we want to optimize for performance on creating the backups or on restoring the backups. Not super clear to me because which compression algorithm you use will affect that too.
As long as these are all optional and you don't have to pick any, I'm fine with any of them.
This next one's the volume list query optimization. I need to look real quickly.
I think I -2'd a code patch related to this, and I didn't actually see this spec.
Yeah, and I think I remember leaving comments about something like this somewhere, but maybe I only looked at it and didn't actually comment.
Is Haijing here? I think he was here yesterday, maybe. So I think the premise here was basically the use case was they want to say volume list everything in error status and also see things that are in statuses like error managing and error managing deleting and error unmanaging and whatever. My first reaction to this is that we need to go fix our states because I don't know why error managing deleting is even a state in the first place. It probably shouldn't be. And if we look at that, that might actually fix the kind of usability mess that this is trying to solve. But I don't know. I mean, it also, we wanted to do query the list of volumes that are in creating and have it also show volumes that are in the managing state because that's kind of like a create operation. I don't know. I mean, I think there is a feature to think about here, but I don't think the way to do this is to just, when you say list volumes in state X, to just add states Y and Z on there as well. I'm not really sure what the best way would be to address this, but I don't think it's what the spec currently suggests doing.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look. There's some comment in the code about why we needed these extra error managing state as opposed to just regular error. But I don't remember.
Part of the reason is because they're trying to communicate to the end user what happened. So if you manage a volume and it fails, they wanted to put it into error managing to say it failed to do the manage operation. Okay. My argument would be put it in error and issue the async user message that tells you what happened, just like any other operation. And then you don't need a separate state for that in the first place. So I really think the biggest first takeaway from this is to just get rid of some of the states that we don't really need anyway, especially the ones that are multiple verbs like error managing deleting. That's just a mess. That's even a state that you can land in.
Could it be because of the cleanup at the start? That error deleting means that you are actually deleting the volume. Since the manage basically goes through the same code as the delete, right? Could it be related?
I do. Now that you say that, I think you're onto something there, where there are cases where if we want to retry something that previously failed, we need to know the difference. So maybe it's not just done for end user communication. We need to identify where that shows up, I guess.
Where it shows or where it shows the normal error deleting?
Well,
what would happen?
Where the actual behavioral difference is between error and error managing, or error managing deleting, and yeah, there may be a whole aspect to it in that regard that didn't occur to me when I had first looked at this. There's also likely this likely bumps into quota tracking stuff too, because depending on where a manage operation fails, maybe you already consumed quota or maybe you didn't. And then if you're going to delete the record that failed, you have to know whether you need to decrement quota usage or not. because you got to know if you consumed it or not in the first place, and part of it may be tied to that too.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so if we get rid of the quotas table, then we wouldn't have to worry about that.
So I don't know. Like I said, I think there probably is something to look into here as far as making things more usable, but I don't think it's quite as straightforward as the submitter hoping at first.
Okay, cool.
Also, I think you can query, like, I always forget how to use it because I don't ever look at it, but the filtering stuff will let you somehow do list status error star, I think. I don't remember exactly how you do it, but I think you can do that somehow if you really want to do this by hand.
Yeah, if you can do it already, then it's just a documentation issue. So that's kind of cool. All right, and then the backup backends. Let's move on.
So just some background of this spec. From one side, this will simplify our backup configuration, and we'll have the pretty same format like we've got for volume backend configuration. From other side, it will help to introduce generic backup feature without modification of existing code, existing volume drivers, etc.
Oh, I see. Okay.
There is working process patch with code. I can find a link. So that patch does not pass CI for all chairs, but you can see how it will be.
One question, this could still in the sample config, could still group all the backup and non-backup configuration options under default, right? Like we do with drivers, I mean.
Yes.
Okay.
So
I
want to use the same approach for backup drivers and for volume drivers.
Mm-hmm. If we can have multiple backup drivers, how would that interact with the existing option in the backup service that you can run multiple processes? Would that apply to each of the backends, or how would that go?
So we will have backup default section that will apply to all backup services, and we've got specific backup section for each service.
Okay, so you would be able to define each of the services, how many processes you want for them.
Yep.
Sounds great.
It's not implemented yet in the code, but that's the idea.
Yep. Awesome.
So how do you Which
Yeah.
backup to when you request a backup?
That's a good question. I did not do anything yet with this, but in future, I think we can use scheduler hints, or probably we can introduce backup type. But for now, I did not change anything, so it's only you can specify which backup service will be working only via scheduler hints or scheduler filters we implement own.
Okay.
This spec is mostly about configuration. How will we configure our backup service? So, in the current implementation, as we've got in Cinder tree, you still can set up and get running several backup instances with different backends, and you still cannot schedule backup for specific instances without scheduler tuning. So this proposal does not do anything with backup scheduling. Probably it will be a next step.
Well, I think the spec should cover the whole volume type idea and everything, because on its own, if you have to start with a hackish implementation, right, with the hints and everything, it probably will be problematic once we introduce the backup types and everything, right?
I can argue on it. Backup types is good idea once we'll have generic backup driver, so we can introduce it with this spec too.
And even if we don't have the generic, now you can have Swift and NFS and Ceph. You could have 3 different ones, right?
Yep.
With the generic is even more important, but even with what we have.
I agree with it. I just didn't mention backup types. Somebody mentioned it in the review, as I remember.
I put a link in the review a second ago to there's a Mataka spec on the scalable backup service work, which I think was starting to go in this direction in a lot of ways. So we probably should review that again and see what ideas we figured out back then and if they're still relevant to this. Because I think there's a lot of stuff.
I didn't read this spec for a while, but as I remember, it was mostly about decouple backup service from volume service. So before that spec implementation, we had to deploy volume service and backup service on one node.
Right, but it also gets into having a backup scheduler and various things too.
We've got backup scheduler already.
Good.
Okay, so this looks promising, so let's continue to review and comment. And I guess the last one, the last two are both works in progress. Did you want to talk about using the database to get information for the scheduler, Ivan, or is that like longer term project?
Not actually. It's work in progress spec. I don't have the time to work on it right now, but this is a good feature to have. That's why I didn't abandon it. Maybe somebody will take care of it or probably some time later this cycle I will have more time.
Okay, great. All right, so we got through a bunch there. That's good. All right, I personally would like to take a 5-minute break. So I'll just declare that, and then we'll pick up right here in at 15:15 UTC. All right.
All right.
Stop the